If you are a motivated piano learner, you might have heard many times suggestions by prominent piano teachers to go to the bed of the key, to support yourself toward the bottom of the key, lean at the bed of the key, and similar. And in this video, I'm going to share with you my personal approach to this key aspect of piano playing. And of course, I will explain you how and why things work when we actually don't want to go to the bed of the key. What are the common traps piano learners fall into when they try to implement this concept initially? And of course, at the end of the video, I will share with you my exclusive approach, how to actually implement this in your piano playing so you would benefit from it right away and progress much faster. So stay tuned and let's start. To grasp the significance of this concept, let's consider how a modern piano functions. When we press a key, the hammer strikes the string actually before the key reaches its lowest point, typically around halfway down the key. Now, you might wonder why reaching the bottom of the key matters at all. Can I just stay always on the surface? So the goal of this suggestion to play at the bottom of the key is to turn your playing into a dynamic process, into a dynamic workflow, where you activate and release a certain set of muscles, one set of muscles at a time. So while one muscle works, another one relaxes, and vice versa. And this is opposite of static tension, when a certain group of muscles is constantly tense. And this is our worst enemy, and we have to find solutions to get rid of static tension. So before jumping into universal solutions which you can implement in your piano playing, let me just quickly demonstrate what basically happens when we play piano. Let's first establish the concept. Yes, and the concept is very simple. It's a bridge and crane analogy. And let me just demonstrate it on an example of a random pattern like this one. So let's say I want to play something like this, however pointless it is. And when I approach the keyboard, I basically use larger arm muscles in order to deliver still relaxed, yet relaxed hand and fingers. And at this point, my arm is basically a crane. It has one point of support in the shoulder, and I use larger arm muscles in order to move around. But my fingers are still relaxed. And when I go through the key with a goal of reaching the bottom of it, I gradually activate muscles which control my finger, which are namely these muscles and tendons in the hand palm, and as well my flexors, which are responsible for grasping things. So basically, piano playing at a certain level is very similar to grasping. And when we grasp something, we feel control, we feel confidence. That's why if you don't experience this sensation of leaning toward the bed of the key often enough in your piano playing, you might feel insecure, and this leads to tension in some other bodily parts, basically. So here we turn our crane into a bridge, activating our flexors and smaller muscles and tendons, which assure the skeletal resistance in the knuckles, in the finger joints, and partially in the wrist. But the wrist is only partially tense. Let's say half of the muscles of the wrist is tense and another half is relaxed, which gives us support so it doesn't fall down, but also it gives us a certain room for flexibility here. So this bridge and crane thing helps us to achieve a natural workflow. So here I'm a bridge, transferring the weight to the second finger, and while moving to the next position, I'm a crane again. And then I'm a bridge, crane, bridge, crane. And very important, when we move somewhere, we start releasing the finger and moving the arm, even still playing the last note of position. So here, you see I'm releasing the finger and moving my arm, even though I'm still in the key, basically, here. Because if you do it too late, then you have, again, tension. You're worried that you don't have enough time and you get tense. And what is most important in such spots where you replace the hand position, you have to let your fingers move as the last thing. So you first move your forearm and fingers follow. So here it would be something like that. And within hand position, you have a proper weight transfer between finger which works toward the finger which is going to work, and releasing the fingers that is done. So here I activate the muscle which assures stability of the fifth finger of this knuckle. But then as soon as I go to the thumb, I use a forearm rotation to transfer the weight, to transfer that leaning sensation toward the thumb, releasing the fifth finger completely. So that part of the arm and hand releases while getting to the thumb. In summary, whether or not you reach the bottom of the key doesn't significantly affect the sound itself, but it profoundly influences your physical sensations, which in turn impact your confidence level. And this confidence, in a cascading effect, affects both your sound quality and technical efficiency. Thus, there are two major advantages to working closely with the key bed. Firstly, piano mechanisms are intricate, and in most of cases they are not perfectly regulated. Thus, you can't always know the exact sound point for each particular key. Therefore, hovering on the surface of the keys and avoiding the idle zone may result in more unintended ghost notes when the hammer fails to reach the string. And even more importantly, not leaning toward the bottom of the key compromises a dynamic playing experience when you alternate between crane and bridge states, and such an alternation is the only thing that helps against the tension caused by constant holding the weight of the hands. However, simply instructing someone, "Oh, just always play to the bottom of the keys and you'll be fine," would be too simplistic. So let's delve into some examples to understand when it's reasonable to seek support at the key bed and when it's not. One of the common traps which people fall into when trying to implement this approach and feeling that support is, of course, pushing too much, holding the tension for too long, for example. Observe my hands. You might see that it sounds quite solid and soft, but I'm kind of working a lot. And you might see that I'm pushing toward the keys more than necessary. That's why when you try to play toward the bottom of the keys, when you try to feel support on the keys, very important to remember that you have to only feel that gentle support at the key, but always play around with like how much is not too much. And this is a very subjective thing, which also depends on the particular instrument, on whether it's like well maintained, whether its action is really good or not, whether you are warmed up or not. So there are many factors in play, but it's just important to remember that we also don't want to fall into another extreme and start like squeezing the sounds out of the keyboard by pressing on the keys too much. Another very important trick is that we need to feel that support in the bed of the key only for a fraction of a second. So this is a very short moment when you really want to feel the bottom of the key. But as soon as you have reached it, as soon as you have supported yourself in the bottom of the key, you have to immediately let it go and release most of the tension. Especially this is very helpful when you play some massive loud chords, which you are supposed to hold. So while going through the key, while reaching the bottom, I'm using, let's say, 100% of energy. But as soon as I have reached the bottom, as soon as I have felt that, okay, I'm in touch with it, I feel grounded, I immediately let it go and release most of the energy. And this is a very important skill to build, and it's also very beneficial for your musical development. And in my further video, I will explain how exactly. So one of the most important habits to do is when you hit a key, let's say you want to hit a key in a strong way, producing a quite strong sound. So you produce a very short impulse, but then release like most of that energy. So you would hold only a little bit of that initial tension you used in order to strike the key. This is especially handy when we have different voices in one hand, like for example in this Burgmüller etude, which I'm going to cover in my renewed course on Burgmüller's etudes, opus 109, so stay tuned for its announcement. And here we have an upper voice which have to be a bit more enlightened than the accompaniment notes. So here, for example, we have to provide enough energy for the hit for that melody note in order to make it more vibrant than muffled accompaniment notes. But for this, in order to be able to play this efficiently, we have to quickly free up the hand after the hit. So you provide an energy for the hit, but then you release most of that energy, keeping your hand free. There are, of course, exceptions when we don't really want to go to the bed of the key, and one of the most common ones might be found in Chopin, who used leggero many times. And sometimes he writes leggero with letters, which means lightly, basically from Italian. And sometimes he just writes those smaller notes with a smaller font, like for example in the first ballad in this spot. So here on the fourth beat, we suddenly get these smaller notes, which always imply leggero. So they have to be played lighter. That's why the first three beats I am playing with a quite embodied touch, very expressively, all the way to E natural. I'm diving right at the bottom of the key, but then I immediately free up like most of the weight in my hand, and I don't really dive in the key for these notes. Of course, it's possible only when you have enough technique, enough skill, and of course when you also have a very good action, because if piano's action is out of balance, if you're not sure about how this or that key would respond, then of course it might not work. You might have a lot of ghost notes. That's why here, for example, I can allow myself this, but if I play on a piano which I don't know, or on a worse piano which has a worse action, then of course I would probably sacrifice this leggero to a certain degree and still go a little bit deeper in the keys in order just to control everything. Another great example of leggero technique when we don't want to get to the bottom of the keys is when we want to play very lightly, contraposing, for example, two different levels. Like, for example, this beautiful Burgmüller's etude, The Pearls, where we have the melody, which is written out with normal font, with larger notes, and smaller notes, those pearls, which are written out with with a smaller font. Yeah, so here it has to sound very like separated, let's say. That's why. So this beauty of like that layering, this is exactly what creates this beauty in this piece. That's why we would separate it and play these passages not reaching the bottom of the keys. But when we have mezzo forte in the next bar, we might want to gradually increase the amount of leaning toward the bottom of the keys, playing very lightly, and then increasing that like pressure on the keys, getting closer and closer to the bottom of the keys gradually in order to transmit that crescendo. And in the next bar, we have diminuendo, so we do the opposite thing. We start a passage with a bit more embodied touch right at the bottom of the key, and then gradually lighter. Thus, we can use this concept in order to diversify the expressiveness of our piano playing. And of course, when we increase speed, we can't really play everything to the bottom of the keys. And here we gradually approaching my concept, which I would like to share with you in order to play fast passages, nevertheless feeling yourself comfortably and feeling a good contact with the keyboard. And let me just illustrate this with the Chopin's so-called Ocean Etude. So here what happens basically, we have a quite rapid tempo, and if I would play everything to the bottom of the keys, I would feel very heavy and it would feel too dense. It would sound more like driving in a tank On the other hand, if I would play everything very lightly, not reaching the bottom of the keys, I would be able to play it much faster, let's say, but less accurate and less, I would feel myself less confident. And you see it kind of like not articulated, it's not solid enough, doesn't sound convincing. So here we come to a very important concept of what I call establishing leaning points. When you play some of the points throughout your passages deeper in the keys, establishing a good contact with the bottom of the keys, but the rest of the notes between these leaning points you play lighter. So here, for example, it would be the first note, also because it's our primarily voice, which we have to voice. Then we are going to play lighter, and then another leaning point is at the second hand position here. Then I play lighter again, and then I lean myself properly here. So it's reasonable to play this piece through, to learn it through establishing these leaning points and exaggerating them at first. So at these points I really reach the bottom. Everything in between is much lighter. Returning to the first ballad of Frédéric Chopin, there is another great example of this approach. Basically what happens here, I would play lighter those notes which are not accented, basically the first and the fourth beat, and on the fifth beat where we have this accent is my leaning point. So basically I have two leaning points in a bar, the rest is played lighter. And this also makes it more vibrant and a little bit closer to the Chopin's aesthetics, because if I would mark also the stronger beats, which you might hear quite often, it sounds very like a bit primitive, I would say, a bit too straightforward for the aesthetics of Frédéric Chopin. And especially when we get to the next spot. Here, basically, if I would play everything very lightly, it would feel very insecure. If I would play everything very heavily, it would feel very heavy and again insecure. So we have to establish leaning points. Also, twice per bar is absolutely enough. So here and here. So these two intervals, they serve me as anchors, points where I really get in touch with the keys, and that's why when learning it for the first time, it's useful to give them a bit more time and lean on them, like a little bit exaggerating that. Like that. Then gradually with time you would diminish that, so it would become less apparent, less obvious, but nevertheless it would stay at the level of sensation, serving you as anchors which help you to stay on track and not lose the contact with the keyboard. I'm incredibly grateful to every one of you who supports me and this channel with your donations, either on Patreon or Super Thanks or PayPal. Of course, please check out my courses if you're interested in more in-depth tutorials on piano playing. And keep in mind that you can always reach out and book an online piano lesson with me following the link in the description. Thank you for watching this and see you next time.